Step by step, the figure stalked her, each advance a silent countdown. Panic drove her faster through twisting streets, the faceless predator's presence pressing closer. "You have nowhere left to run," his voice whispered, scythe glinting in the dim light. Just as the killing arc began to fall, a flash split the darkness. Steel met steel. A tall, broad-shouldered man stood between them, muscles taut, eyes glowing. No one knew who he was. He moved like a storm to split it, black coat swirling in the cold haze. Behind him, she gasped in disbelief. Ahead, the masked specter finally understood. This prey had a protector. I never liked walking home from the campus library after midnight, but that night the air in Brookhaven felt heavier than usual. Street lights flickered one by one as if something was pacing me. My shoes tapped against the cracked pavement, and I could almost hear a second pair of footsteps trailing behind mine. I kept telling myself it was nothing, but my chest tightened with each block. At the corner, an old roadside shrine stood half-collapsed, candles burned down to puddles of wax. Something in me whispered to keep moving, but my legs slowed. A sudden chill rushed past, colder than winter air. I froze. From the corner of my eye, a tall man-shaped shadow peeled away from the shrine's wall. His face was blank like melted wax, eyes deep pits leaking a dark, slow tear. He didn't walk, he glided toward me, his breath spilling out in clouds of pale frost that bit into my skin. My heart slammed against my ribs. I ran. My backpack swung wildly as I cut through the narrow alley behind the old grocery store. The sound of his movement wasn't footsteps. It was like the scrape of wet cloth dragging on stone. I burst out onto an empty main street, but it wasn't the same one I knew. Neon signs were gone, replaced by wooden storefronts lit by oil lamps. My phone was dead. Carriage wheels rattled in the distance. My lungs burned. Somehow I had crossed into another time. A man in a long coat glanced at me but didn't speak, vanishing behind a fog that thickened the air. The shadow was still coming, faster now, its form bending unnaturally to close the gap. I ducked into an alley, but it ended in a wall. His shape filled the only exit. My breath caught as he raised an arm toward me. His skin burned and cracked as if it had been through fire. A sudden flash split the dark. A man stepped between us, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a weathered brown coat. His eyes glowed faintly blue in the gloom. The shadow recoiled, hissing without sound. The stranger's stance was steady, as if he'd been waiting for this exact fight. Light rippled from his hands, forming a barrier that pushed the figure back. He didn't look at me, only kept his gaze locked on the thing, moving with precision, as if every step was measured. In one swift motion, he lunged forward, and the shadow dissolved into the fog like smoke pulled by the wind. The street was silent again. My knees shook, but before I could speak, the man turned and walked toward the end of the block. I stumbled after him, but the ground shifted beneath me. A blink later, I was back on the cracked sidewalk in modern Brookhaven, the shrine behind me untouched, candles still burning low. My breath came ragged. People walked past as if nothing had happened, but the cold stayed in my bones. For days after, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in another layer of time, that faceless man was still looking for me. And maybe that stranger in the brown coat was still standing guard. The day after the alley incident, I convinced myself it had been some twisted dream. The weather was bright, people laughed over coffee, and the city smelled of roasted nuts from the street carts. Still, there was a weight behind my ribs I couldn't shake. I kept glancing over my shoulder, as if something invisible leaned just beyond my sight. Even the sound of bicycle bells felt sharp. By afternoon, I met up with Drew and Marissa near the old clock tower for a late lunch. They teased me about skipping last night's study group, and I almost told them everything. But the memory of that faceless figure in the mist was like touching ice. My voice caught in my throat, so I laughed it off. We strolled past the tower, its hands frozen at 4:17. Drew said it had been broken for years. I swear I saw the minute hand twitch. I slowed down, watching the shadow of the tower stretch unnaturally long across the cobblestones. A girl selling flowers turned her head toward me. Her eyes didn't seem focused, and for a second, her face blurred, like heat haze. I blinked, and she was normal again, wrapping paper around a bouquet. My pulse climbed. I wanted to keep walking, but the air had thickened, every sound muffled as though I were underwater. Then came that low hum again. the one I'd heard before I fell into the other street last night. It pulsed in the soles of my shoes, in the back of my teeth. Marissa's words became distant, like she was speaking from the end of a tunnel. I turned, and there he was, the same tall figure, no face, standing halfway down the block. No one else seemed to notice. My skin prickled as he stepped forward, smooth, deliberate. Drew touched my arm, asking if I was okay, but before I could answer, the ground tilted under me. My vision flashed white, and in the blink of an eye, the bustling street was gone. I stood on the same cobblestones, but the world was painted in sepia, and the air smelled faintly of coal and rain. Lanterns hung from posts. A man in a bowler hat walked past without looking at me. Somewhere, a horse's hooves clattered on stone. The figure was still there, closer now. My legs wanted to run, but they wouldn't move. A voice called from behind, deep, steady, and a man stepped into view. It wasn't the same stranger from last night. This one was younger, with a worn leather coat and dark hair tied back. His eyes locked on the faceless shape, as if he'd known it all his life. Beside him, a woman in a green dress clutched a satchel, her gaze darting between us. The man moved toward the figure, shoulders squared, speaking in a language I didn't understand. The figure paused, tilting its head as though considering. Then it drifted back, dissolving into the haze at the far end of the street. My knees buckled, and the woman caught my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. She studied me with an intensity that made me shiver, then asked my name. I opened my mouth, but before sound came out, the hum roared again. I was back at the clock tower, the sun glaring in my eyes. Drew was frowning, asking why I'd just zoned out. Marissa waved a hand in front of my face, joking that I'd gone into another world. They didn't know how close that was to the truth. My throat was dry. I scanned the crowd, half expecting to see the young man or the woman in green. Nothing. Only strangers passing by, their lives moving on as if nothing had shifted. That night, I lay awake, replaying every detail. The way the street had smelled of rain, the way the woman's fingers had tightened when the hum started again, and most of all, the look in the man's eyes, calm, certain, like he had been fighting this battle for a long time. It wasn't comfort, not really. It was a warning. I realized then that this wasn't a one-time accident. The path between times was open, and somehow I had been marked. Whatever that thing was, it would follow. And somewhere out there, both the stranger from last night and the pair I met today were moving in the same shadows, waiting for the moment they'd have to step in again. I didn't know when, but I knew it would come. I had never been the type to believe in strange coincidences, but the past week had been filled with too many to ignore. The same bus driver with the same crooked cap, the same woman with the lilac scarf who always stood too still, even the same bird, or at least it looked like it, perching on the same wire each morning. It was as if life had started looping without telling me. That morning was warmer than usual for autumn, and I was late. My coffee was still too hot to drink, so I kept sipping air through the lid. I walked fast, passing faces that blurred together until one stood out, a man in a long charcoal coat, leaning casually against the corner store. He wasn't doing anything unusual, but the way his eyes followed me, steady and unblinking, made the street feel narrower. By the time I reached the crosswalk, my skin felt prickled, like the air itself was watching. I told myself to focus on the light, on the sound of traffic, on the way my sneakers slapped the pavement. But as I stepped off the curb, everything tilted. The colors dulled, the noise drained away, and I was standing in the middle of a cobblestone street under a pale yellow sky. The air was heavy, scented with smoke and something faintly sweet. Wooden carts creaked by, their wheels leaving wet tracks on the stones. I turned, hoping for a familiar landmark, but saw only narrow buildings leaning toward each other as if whispering secrets. The man in the charcoal coat was still there, now closer, his posture sharper, his presence heavier. Before I could speak, someone brushed past me from behind. A tall figure with dark hair tied back and a green tunic that moved like water stepped between us. His voice was low and firm, the words in a language I didn't understand. But the coat-wearing stranger paused. The air between them seemed to thicken, and I could feel the tension press against my skin. Then another figure appeared at my side, a young woman with copper hair tucked under a faded hat. Her hand found my elbow as if she'd known me forever. We moved together, my steps awkward against hers, weaving through a market that hadn't been there moments ago. The crowd was strange but not unfriendly. Still, every glance that lingered on me felt weighted. We ducked into a narrow alley where the sun barely touched the ground. The man in the green tunic followed, his eyes scanning the street behind us. He spoke to the copper-haired woman, their words clipped and urgent. I caught fragments. My name wasn't one of them, yet I felt certain they were speaking about me. I asked where I was, my voice too loud in the tight space. They exchanged a quick look, as if deciding how much to tell. The woman finally said we were safe for now. I didn't believe her. Safe didn't feel like my heart pounding so hard it shook my vision. Safe didn't feel like shadows curling at the edges of the alley. Something flickered behind the man in the tunic, like a ripple in the air. He stepped forward, raising his arm, and the ripple broke into shards of light that spun out before vanishing. The copper-haired woman pressed her hand to my back, urging me forward. I moved without thinking, trusting her urgency more than my own sense of direction. We emerged into a square lit by dozens of hanging lanterns. The light felt warmer here, softer, but I still searched for the man in the charcoal coat. I didn't see him, yet the unease remained, a quiet hum in my chest. The green tunic man spoke again, slower this time, and though I didn't understand the words, I understood the intent. Don't wander, stay close. We crossed the square toward a building with arched windows and ivy climbing its stone walls. Inside, the air was cooler, scented faintly of herbs. The woman led me to a bench near the fireplace. Her grip on my arm finally loosening, she asked me to sit, then vanished into a side room with the man in the tunic. Their voices were muffled, but the tone was tense. I took in the details, the carved beams above me, the faint hum of wind against the shutters, the flicker of firelight on the floor. None of it belonged to my world. My phone was still in my pocket, but when I pulled it out, the screen was black. No matter how long I held the button, it stayed that way. When they returned, the woman's face was calm, but her eyes were not. She said I should rest, that someone would explain more soon. I wanted to argue, to demand answers, but exhaustion dragged at me. As I lay back, the firelight blurred into shadow. The last thing I saw was the green tunic man standing near the door, watching, not with suspicion, but with the weight of someone who had decided to guard me. I woke to soft daylight and the quiet murmur of voices outside the window. The square was still there, the lanterns swaying in the breeze, and the people moving through it like a scene they'd repeated 1,000 times. I still didn't know if this place was past, future, or something else entirely. But I knew one thing. The man in the charcoal coat was somewhere out there, and he hadn't finished whatever he came here for. I had convinced myself the market square was safe. People were laughing, exchanging coins for baskets of fruit, children weaving between stalls. The ordinary noise made me believe the strange events from earlier were nothing but fragments of a restless mind. Then I caught it again. An unfamiliar hum beneath the crowd's chatter, low and steady, almost like the pulse of the earth. My hand brushed against the wooden frame of a vendor's cart, grounding myself, yet the sensation didn't fade. Theo was at my side, scanning the square with a quiet focus I had learned not to question. Beside him, Emily adjusted the strap of her satchel, her eyes darting toward the alley on the far end. She didn't say anything, but the set of her jaw was enough. A shadow shifted there, though the afternoon sun left nowhere for shadows to linger. The hum grew louder. My breath shortened without permission. We moved as one, weaving through the crowd, following that strange vibration. My senses sharpened with every step, as if the air itself had thinned. Theo's hand reached out just before I crossed the alley's threshold. I froze. Beyond was not the cracked stone and stray cats I expected, but a haze of golden light, swirling like dust in water. I could see shapes within it, moving slow, yet too far to make sense of. Emily's voice was low, telling me to stay behind her, but my feet betrayed me, inching forward. The moment I touched the haze, the square was gone. The smell of roasted bread and fresh apples replaced by damp soil and cool wind. We stood in a forest, but it was wrong. The trees leaned at angles that defied sense, their bark marked with spirals that seemed to shift if I stared too long. Theo stepped ahead, placing himself between me and a figure that emerged from the mist. It wasn't threatening, at least not in movement. but its eyes, pale and steady, held a weight that pressed against my ribs. Emily whispered something I didn't catch, her fingers tightening around my wrist. The figure spoke in a language that curled and twisted like smoke. The sound wasn't loud, yet it filled the space around us, erasing the rustle of leaves and even the wind. Theo responded, surprising me, though I didn't recognize his voice. It carried a resonance I'd never heard from him before. The figure tilted its head, then turned and vanished between the crooked trees. The mist folded in after it, as though swallowing its path. For a moment, none of us moved. Then faintly, I heard the hum again, but now it came from somewhere deep in the forest. We didn't discuss whether to follow. The choice felt made for us, stitched into the air. I took one last glance over my shoulder, half expecting the golden haze to be there, offering a way back. It wasn't. Only the leaning trees and the path curling ahead, pulling us forward. The forest seemed endless, each step stretching the path longer instead of shorter. The light filtered through the branches in strange, shifting patterns, and I couldn't tell if it was morning or dusk. My shoes sank slightly into the damp soil, the sound muted as if the air didn't want us here. Theo walked a few feet ahead, his shoulders tense, his gaze fixed forward. Emily stayed close to me, her breathing quick and shallow. Every few moments I caught her glancing behind us, though I hadn't heard a single footstep but ours. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the silence was watching. We reached a clearing where the trees bent outward, forming a ring. In the center stood a stone pillar no higher than my waist, its surface covered in faintly glowing lines. They pulsed in a slow rhythm, like a heartbeat. Theo circled it carefully, while Emily crouched to examine a crack near its base. I stayed still, afraid to disturb whatever this was. The hum from earlier returned, stronger now, vibrating through my chest. I thought it was the pillar until I noticed the shadows stretching toward us from the edges of the clearing, though nothing stood there to cast them. My mouth dried instantly. Theo straightened, his eyes locking with mine, and I could tell he felt it too. A figure stepped into the ring, as though the shadows had shaped themselves into a person. It was taller than Theo, draped in a long cloak that swayed without wind. I couldn't see a face, only two faint lights where eyes should have been. Emily rose slowly, placing herself between me and it, her hand steady though I sensed her unease. The figure raised an arm toward the pillar, and the glowing lines shifted, rearranging into symbols that flickered like flames. I didn't understand them, yet something deep in my mind felt a warning. Theo moved closer, speaking in that strange voice again, the same one he'd used in the alley. The figure paused, head tilting slightly, as if considering him. Without warning, the light from the pillar surged, wrapping around us in a spiral. The air thickened, pulling at my clothes and hair, dragging me toward the center. Emily gripped my arm hard, but the pull was stronger. My vision blurred with flashes of places I'd never seen. Deserts under violet skies, oceans with silver waves, cities made of glass. Then it stopped. We were no longer in the clearing. The pillar, the figure, the forest, they were gone. Instead, we stood on a narrow path suspended above a vast expanse of mist. The air here was warmer, scented faintly of something metallic. I looked at Theo and Emily, both catching their breath, both equally unsure where we had arrived. Somewhere in that mist below, the hum returned again, low and constant, as if it had followed us across worlds. The mist below shifted in slow swirls, like something alive was moving beneath it. My balance felt uncertain on the narrow path, as if the air itself was tilting. Theo scanned the horizon while Emily crouched, testing the edges of the stone walkway with her fingers. I wanted to ask what he saw, but my voice stuck. There was a faint glow in the distance, soft at first, then growing until it traced the outline of another figure ahead. It stood perfectly still, hands folded, head slightly lowered. The way it blocked the path made my chest tighten. We moved closer, each step careful. The figure's shape sharpened. It was a man, tall, with features I couldn't place. His clothes were unlike anything I'd seen, layers of pale fabric that shimmered faintly with each movement of the air. His eyes lifted to meet ours, and in them was both recognition and warning. Theo slowed, murmuring something low enough I couldn't hear. Emily stayed behind me now, as if the man's presence drew a quiet tension she didn't want to confront. I felt a strange pull from him, the same hum that had followed us here, but now it was inside my head instead of the air. The man raised one hand and the mist below rippled, parting to reveal flashes of land far beneath us. Forests, rivers, a city of tall spires that glimmered like crystal. I didn't know if he was showing us the way or warning us from it. Theo's jaw clenched, his gaze fixed on the vision, his body leaning forward. The glow around the man dimmed suddenly, replaced by a shadow crawling up the path from behind us. It didn't move like a person. It slid, reshaping, stretching toward us. Emily gripped my arm so tight it hurt. Theo stepped in front, his stance steady but rigid. The shadow reached the man, and he turned toward it as though expecting its arrival. In one motion, the walkway under our feet shook. Cracks split in the stone, widening fast. I stumbled, nearly slipping into the mist, but Emily pulled me back. The man's voice rang out, low and resonant, the words unfamiliar yet urgent. The shadow recoiled, twisting violently before surging upward. There was a flash, bright, blinding, then silence. When my vision cleared, we were somewhere else entirely. The path was gone, replaced by a vast hall of dark marble, the ceiling lost in shadow. The man stood a few steps away, watching us with the same unreadable eyes, while Theo's breathing came fast and heavy. Emily didn't speak. Neither did I. We just waited, the hum now steady in the walls around us like the heartbeat of this place. The marble beneath my shoes felt colder than ice, as though it had been untouched for centuries. My breath came out slow, steady, even though my heart wanted to sprint. Theo moved first, his footsteps echoing too loudly in the vast space. Emily's eyes darted around, tracking the shifting shadows on the walls. Somewhere in the distance, a faint vibration hummed like a low chord. The man from the path stood in the center, hands clasped loosely, watching us with the same unreadable calm. I couldn't tell if he was a threat or a guide. Then from the far end of the hall, another figure emerged, a woman with hair the color of dusk, her gown trailing along the floor as if it belonged here far more than we did. Her eyes locked on mine, and it was like she already knew every reason I had to be afraid. Theo stepped toward her, but the man shifted subtly, placing himself between us and the woman. The air tightened, not in temperature but in weight, as though the room itself was leaning closer to hear what would happen next. Emily whispered my name under her breath, the sound small but sharp enough to pull me back from my own thoughts. The woman lifted her hand, palm open, and the black marble at her feet rippled as if it were liquid. Shapes rose within it, faces, places, fragments of movement that disappeared too quickly to understand. Theo's stance faltered, his shoulders tense, and I knew he saw something meant only for him. My own reflection wavered in the floor, but it wasn't me I recognized. The man spoke then, low and resonant, the words strange yet pulling at something buried deep in my chest. The woman's expression shifted, her lips curving not in kindness but in something like recognition mixed with disappointment. Between them, the air vibrated harder, and my ears rang. Emily took a step back and I followed without thinking. The marble under us trembled, a single crack cutting across the floor toward the far wall. It stopped at the base of a towering archway, where light spilled through, not warm, not cold, but impossibly clean. The woman turned toward it, her gown stirring without a breeze, and for a moment I thought she might vanish through. The man looked at us once, as if weighing something, then reached into the vibrating air and twisted it. The hall blurred, the light fractured, and the next breath I took smelled of pine and earth. We were standing at the edge of a forest, the marble gone, the sky layered in pale gold and shadow. Theo's voice was the first to break the silence, but I didn't hear the words. My focus stayed on the space between the trees, where the shape of the woman lingered, her outline fading like smoke, yet still watching, as if the forest was hers and we had only stepped into her story. The forest pressed in on us with a quiet that didn't feel natural. Every step sank into a carpet of moss that seemed too deep, swallowing sound. Theo kept glancing upward, as if the trees might bend down to touch us. Emily stayed close to my side, her breathing measured but quick. Somewhere ahead, faint lights flickered between the trunks, drifting like willow wisps. We moved toward them without speaking, drawn more by instinct than choice. The air grew cooler, carrying a faint metallic tang that made the hairs on my arms rise. I caught sight of a figure through the haze, a tall man with pale skin and eyes that caught the light in a strange reflective way. His clothes were old-fashioned, almost ceremonial, and though he didn't move toward us, his presence filled the space like an unspoken warning. Theo hesitated, but Emily pressed forward, her gaze locked on the man. I could feel something in the air shift, as if the forest itself exhaled. Then, from the shadows behind him, a second figure stepped forward, a young woman in a deep green cloak, her face half hidden. She didn't speak, but her eyes scanned us one by one, pausing on me longer than the others. The lights around us dimmed, and the path beneath our feet changed, the moss thinning to reveal smooth black stone. My chest tightened. The man and the cloaked woman began to circle slowly, their steps synchronized though they never touched. A sound rose from the ground, a low, resonant hum that vibrated in my bones. Theo's jaw clenched, his posture rigid, while Emily's eyes darted between them, as if trying to read their intentions. A sudden shift in the air pulled my focus to the right. Between the trees, a narrow opening had appeared, spilling soft white light. The woman in the cloak stopped circling and looked directly at me, tilting her head toward the opening. My pulse quickened. The man's gaze followed hers, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the world seemed to hold still, waiting for a choice to be made. Theo moved first, stepping toward the light, and the ground shuddered in response. The man stepped aside without a word, but his eyes remained locked on us as if memorizing every detail. Emily grabbed my hand, her grip firm, and we stepped through the narrow opening together. The light swallowed us whole, the forest vanishing in a single blink, leaving only the echo of that hum deep in my chest.